The Spurs transfer tittle-tattle is heating up as we find ourselves less than 2 months away from the transfer window opening yet again. And boy, do we need some incomings to help out an ailing squad with a severe lack of creativity. Speaking of which, in yesterday's pre-Champions League press conference, Thomas Frank was asked all about his pragmatic ways and why Spurs looked so toothless and creatively impotent against Chelsea. I'll bring you his responses and my thoughts as he begins to feel a familiar heat to other recent Tottenham gaffers. All this and more on today's episode of Daily Spurs News. Thank you so much for watching and listening wherever you are. Do give this video a like if you're watching on YouTube, and please do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. As I'm sure you're aware, we have a new sponsor, okjersey.com. They bring you the best current as well as retro shirts from around the world at great prices. And they have some really brilliant Spurs vintage retro shirts. So do check them out. Scan the QR code, which is just on the left of me there. And if you do buy anything, use the code BARN, B-A-R-N, short for Barnaby, in the coupon box when you get to checkout. And you can get 8% off. Also, I'll be doing a watch along tonight on BigUp. Do join me on BigUp for all the Spurs watch alongs. Details of how is in the description box below. I'm sure you can notice I'm in a different room today. My girlfriend's brother is over here staying, so he's using my studio to sleep in because my studio may also be my bedroom. Oh my God, you're really getting the inner workings. But let's get into the latest Tottenham news. And we'll start with some transfer news. In the face of interest from both Aston Villa and Spurs, as well as Atletico Madrid, Borussia Dortmund, RB Leipzig, Brentford are playing hardball over Kevin Schade. They don't want to sell him, but that to me is just trying to rise up the transfer value of the player. And Thomas Frank is desperately looking for creativity in that front line. He's desperately looking to find something that will work. And he's worked with Kevin Schade before. So keep an eye on that one. It would not surprise me at all if Schade was becoming a serious player of interest to Tottenham as we get closer to January. Another player, again, spoke about him last week, I think, but more rumours that Jonathan David could be on his way out of Juventus already, having only joined them in the summer, and he was on Tottenham's list for a long time. Both Spurs and Bayern Munich have made inquiries about the Canadian striker, and a January departure from Juve, the old lady, is being considered. And a young Argentinian wonderkid, 21-year-old central defender Lautaro Rivero from River Plate, is also interesting Spurs. Apparently has a €100 million release clause, but is also on the radar of Man City and Juventus. But if you're a young player, realistically playing in Europe or across the world, River Plate, especially Argentinian, with Christian Romero playing at Spurs as a centre-back, maybe you would quite like the idea of coming to Tottenham because you will get chances. Spurs currently one of the clubs in Europe willing to give first-team opportunities to young players. So keep an eye on that one as well. Clearly, Johan Lange doing his business around the world, whilst Don Fabio Paratici keeps an eye on players he can try and bring straight into the first team, like Kevin Schade. Okay, let's get into yesterday's pre-Champions League press conference. Obviously, we have FC Copenhagen tonight in the Champions League, 8 p.m. kickoff at home. I'll be doing the watch along on BigUp, so come and join me there. Thomas Frank says that Jed Spence and Mohamed Kudus, who were missing from training yesterday, were just dealing with knocks. So both could, and he said should feature in tonight's game. He also confirmed that because of Lucas Bergvall's concussion, one of the few concussions I've ever seen from a ball being kicked at a player's head, that is so rare. Only Spurs could really suffer from that, but he will miss at least the next 2 matches. So he won't be seen until after the international break. That is a huge miss for us. Lucas Bergvall out for Copenhagen and Manchester United at home on Saturday. Obviously, after the weekend, huge story on social media and in the press about Mickey van der Ven and Jed Spence seemingly ignoring Thomas Frank's request for them to go and thank the fans after the game. Now, I'm going to start with what I felt about it. I felt to some degree that I understood their predicament because the fans had been booing the Spurs players since about the 20th minute, 25th minute of the game, and it was incessant unhappiness with the sideways and backwards passing. And if I'm, Jed Spence or Mickey van der Ven, to a degree, I'm just doing what I'm told. Like, I've no doubt that Justin Cochran and Thomas Frank are saying to them, keep the ball. If there's nothing definitely on, then go backwards and sideways to keep the ball. And that, allied with a lack of confidence in the squad, is what led to that and led to the booing from the fans. And realistically, if you're going to get asked to then thank the fans and do a lap of honour after you've lost 1-0 at home to Chelsea, one of the club's bitterest rivals, and you've been booed incessantly since the 20th minute. I can kind of see why Jed Spence threw his hands up in the air and Mickey van der Ven was like, no. That doesn't mean I think they were right to do it. Far from it. I think they needed to show a little bit more maturity and understanding of the situation. But Thomas Frank talked about it yesterday, and he said that Mickey van der Ven and Jed Spence came into my office unprompted to apologize. He said, we all have a perception of what happens in a moment, and we're so strong as to knowing what that was. We're very good at that, but none of us really know. My first question was how they were. Of course, I was happy that they came in because I knew the questions would come today. We had a good chat, but we'll keep that internally. It would be very, very unusual for me to throw a player under the bus because we're all human. So there lies the difference between Thomas Frank and Jose Mourinho, who I'm pretty sure would have thrown them under the bus straight away. However, I did see some conversation yesterday, I think maybe on social media, it might even been on Sky Sports News, about, oh, I know where it was actually. It was on Ben Foster's podcast, by the way, which is really interesting. I really enjoy the clips I see from that. And Ben Foster and his guests were talking about how that would never fly under Alex Ferguson. Basically, if that happened under Alex Ferguson, those players would never play for Manchester United again. And I understand that as well. And Alex Ferguson was basically the godfather of that football club. I do think times have moved on. I also don't think Thomas Frank as yet has the power within the football club to bomb out players like Jed Spence and Mickey van der Ven. But on the flip of that, realistically, would Mickey van der Ven and Jed Spence have done that if they were playing for Alex Ferguson under Man United? No. But that was, 15 years ago now, and things have changed, and players have changed, and they need to be dealt with in a different way. Thomas Frank went on to say, I think if they hadn't come in, of course, I would have had to ask them about the situation they were walking in, what they were feeling, why they were doing it, because we all have a perception, and we're very good to have that strongly, oh, that's because they did this or whatever, or they felt that, or because their mother wasn't well, or they didn't like the head coach, or they were irritated with the performance, or it was because they lost, or whatever. We're very, very good at assuming. That's what he's saying. They're very, very good. We're all very good at assuming we know what the situation is, but none of us knows. I agree with him on that, actually. So that would be my first question to them. How were they and why? Of course, I'm happy because I knew the question would come today, as he previously said. Like I said to the players, when I've said all this before, it'll be very, very unusual. Like he said, if I ever throw a player under the bus, we're all humans, but I'll always protect them, always, which I think in the main is a good thing. However, just playing devil's advocate, he did throw Yves Bissouma under the bus for lateness. And I think there's an argument to suggest that lateness, no matter how persistent it was, probably not as publicly embarrassing, or it definitely isn't as publicly embarrassing for Thomas Frank as what Jed Spence and Mickey van der Ven did. So he has to be careful not to be in any way hypocritical, Thomas Frank. He was then asked about being in the spotlight and the extreme nature of reactions to performances at a club like Spurs. He said, of course, I sense there's a tiny bit more attention to everything, but that was the one thing I was 1,000% sure of would happen, that it would be different. Everything else has been the same. 20 fantastic players and people that want to work in the same direction. A little bit tactical, technical coaching and all that. The media is the biggest difference. I'm very, very happy I'm not on social media. The only reason I sense there can be something with fans or creativity, it's a lot of questions from the press conferences. It is what it is. It's part of it, no problem. Now, I would have to disagree with Thomas Frank here, because the journalists in the press conferences, for me, are the conduit, the middlemen, the kind of the people who are helping the fans get their questions asked. I think the journalists are only asking the questions in the most part that the fans want to know the answer to. So for him to kind of, and it seemed to me, let me know in the comments if you think I've read this wrong, but he's kind of suggesting that if he didn't have to do press conferences from the journalists, then the fans wouldn't be asking these questions. But I completely disagree. It's just that we have the journalists almost as a mouthpiece, as an opportunity for those questions to be asked. And we are all wondering about why we're so boring to watch at home. We're all wondering about how we put in such an embarrassingly appalling performance against Chelsea. And that's why the journalists are asking that. We're all wondering why Mickey van der Ven and Jed Spence did that. That's why those journos are asking it. So it comes across as a little naive to me to allude to the idea that the fans don't need to know these answers, but maybe I've misread it. I'm not sure. Thomas Frank was also asked, does he have any theories on why it's so difficult for the team to play at home? He says, of course, it's a relatively small sample size for me to look into, if I'm honest. So I think first and foremost, we need to work very hard on keeping adding to performances, adding layers, improving, working very hard on the training pitch, in meeting rooms and on one-on-one actions. I see a good improvement in the team in general. Okay. I mean, I guess yes. Okay. Actually, I'll give him this from 17th last year. I'd say yes. Of course, he says we're coming off the back of a bad performance. That's a big flashing light red now, right now, as in mean like a red flag, I guess. So everyone is struggling a bit to look past that and to look at some of the very good performances we've had this year as well. I also think it's fair to say that we're coming off the back of, in many ways, a fantastic season, but also a tough season. If anyone had said that we now have been 17, we got 17 points after 10 games and unbeaten in the Champions League, I don't know where we are, fifth. I think we might actually be fourth in the Premier League. It doesn't matter where we are now, it's where we are at the end of the season. Everything is definitely not perfect, but there is a decent foundation. Then it's up to us to add layers. I think everyone would have taken that situation where we are now in terms of 22 defeats last year and finishing 17th. The Europa League is fantastic. Wow, he said. But the Champions League is different. I just want to get the point across. I think the fans were fantastic the first 30 minutes of the game on Saturday night against Chelsea. I think the noise was incredible and that carried us forward. Can I just, I'm just going to interrupt that quickly, his comments there, because I'm not sure if I brought this up, but one thing I would say is I think Spurs really suffered from Lucas Bergvall's concussion, not just in terms of losing him and the poor performance from Xabi Simons, but how that kind of 6 or 7 minute delay when he got concussed and then there was a decision trying to be made about whether to take him off or not, that sucked a lot of the noise out of the stadium that had started at the beginning. And I think Spurs are unlucky. And at the moment, I feel like we've had a few bits of luck, a few own goals this season that have gone for us, but also we've had a few bits of bad luck. Obviously the injuries, but little things like that as well have just not helped us. And quite often, I think when there's a lack of confidence and a lack of, yeah, I guess mainly confidence and form, probably, I guess is what I'm talking about. Sometimes those bits of bad luck can come on top of that as well. So we have to be careful or not be careful, but we have to really try and make sure we improve that form to bring more confidence. And hopefully, fingers crossed, after the international break, some injuries can come back as well and can lead to a kind of forwardness in momentum. But until then, as this kind of bad luck keeps affecting us, Bergvall being out, etc., for the next 2 games, we need to just scrap and fight for every point. And I said it, I think, in yesterday's video. I think tonight against Copenhagen will be another ugly, ugly scrap. Thomas Frank went on to say, we all get a bit frustrated. It's natural. I think it's more than fair because we're in the performance business. If we can't deal with the pressure, the negativity and the criticism, we shouldn't sit here. Probably Vicario and you play a little bit more football than me because he had Vic next to him at the time. But we're in the football world because we love the game. We love to be part of something. We love to be part of the team. It's nice with the big occasions. It's not that, but we play because we love football. We've been growing, and then we have the big crowds. I think the fans were fantastic in the first 30 minutes, he said again. After the game, if we perform badly, and on top of that lost the game, it's more than fair enough that they boo us. During the game, we need a little bit of help, especially when it's not going our way. They could carry us over the line if we got a little bit of an unfair 1-1. What a feeling. That point could have been the difference in the long season. So this is where, and Vicario does a similar thing later on, a fair amount of people on social media yesterday were angry because they felt that both Thomas Frank and Guillermo Vicario were slightly blaming the fans for not getting behind the team on Saturday. My argument, I have to say, would be slightly with the fans on that one, which is, and I've said it all season, at home, especially at home, the fans are basically, I think they'll give you the first 5-10 minutes in terms of being excited, still feeling their last beer from being in the concourse. But in general, I think they are waiting to have things happen on the pitch that excite them. And that doesn't have to be a wonder strike from 30 yards into the top bin. It can be a 50-50 challenge that you plow through. These are the kind of things that actually Romero, I think we've missed a lot more. He plows through a 50-50. He goes on a marauding run. He plays a brilliant pass through the lines. And it gets the crowd up. It gets you on the edge of your seat. And what we're really missing a lot at the moment, and have done for quite a long time, is almost like an Aaron Lennon-esque player. When Aaron Lennon used to play for Spurs at the old White Hart Lane, when he got the ball, you could audibly hear the sound of the flick seats going back, the plastic seats going back, because players were... the crowd were all as one getting off their seat because they knew Lennon was going to excite you and beat a man on the outside or come inside or set something up. And Aaron Lennon's final ball wasn't always brilliant. It definitely improved towards the end of his Spurs career. But it's not just all about can you actually get the assist or whatever. It's about the excitement of beating a player, a bit of magic. And that is what Tottenham is all about. That's why To Dare Is To Do is written on the side of the stadium. That's why we talk about the Tottenham Way. That's why there's a podcast called The Tottenham Way. Because it's that excitement, it's that bravado, it's that daring. And we're a little bit functional at the moment. And at home, when the Spurs fans are paying some of the highest season tickets in the world to go and see that. We need more of it. And yes, undoubtedly we're being robbed of that from injuries with the likes of James Maddison, Decky Kulusevski. But I think to some degree Spurs need to buy more players like that as well, more flair players. And then if you've got flair players, you can have a functional system and allow a flair player, one or two of your flair players, to have a bit more of a free role. And if we got a few more players like that around Xavi Simons, I've no doubt that he would come out of his shell as well and get more confident and be able to play some triangles and some 1 and 2 touch stuff. But we're really lacking that at the moment. And that, I think, is one big reason why Spurs are really suffering. Another thing that Thomas Frank said about the poor form at home, he said he thinks I think there are different types of games as well. Sometimes, because everything is accumulating or adding up a little bit, the number you gain is not a fantastic number. We haven't won at home the last whatever games in the Premier League, not too many. Completely different games, though. Well, it's been quite a while, hasn't it? The Villarreal game, I guess, was the last one. That was a pretty ugly performance. The last decent performance, probably Burnley at home, but they are poor. He goes on to say, some teams are difficult to play against in that environment. Others are a little bit easier. Everything is difficult, but for example, Villa, I think we are very good competitively. Unfortunately, we lost. No, Thomas, I'm sorry. We did okay in the first half. We scored an early goal, but overall, no. As soon as Villa went ahead, we couldn't lay a glove on them. And that's something that Spurs have suffered from, under Frank and under Ange as well, in the most part, maybe other than that Brighton performance where we came back from 2-0 down. Whenever we go down, we struggle to get back into a game. He went on to say, we could easily have won that game 1-0. Okay, Thomas. I think Saturday night is an accumulation of a lot of things. A big London derby, always a hope that we can beat them. We haven't won against them for a long time, and that just added a bit. He was asked a question, which is an interesting one in the press conference. If the home form continues to be an issue, would he consider training at the stadium? He said, maybe. I haven't thought about it. I'm always listening to good suggestions. I personally don't think that would make a huge difference. That's how I feel. One thing that's worth talking about, and I'd like to hear your opinions on in the comments, is the thoughts that Thomas Frank is a defensive coach, a pragmatic coach, and he was asked about that. And whether he's surprised by people thinking that, considering his record with Brentford. He said, I think it all depends on the narrative. So whose narrative is it? Is it a journalist or is it a few fans? I guess we have quite a few fans out there. So I guess the one who writes on social media, I'm not on social media. I'm very aware that we haven't been free-flowing in games. I think there's definitely been moments where it's been quite good. So something we work very hard on every single day. I think it's fair to say that teams I've managed, we've been able to score a lot of goals. Also, a Brentford team with, how can you say, less on paper, kind of lesser players. We created a lot of top goal scorers. I'm convinced we'll do the same again here. I hope you're right, Thomas. He says, I also think it's fair to say that we're working very hard on it. We have players that do everything that they can. It's my job, together with the coaches, to make sure that they get good relationships and good structure and be confident. Listen, these managers, they have to answer these questions and they have to protect their players and to some degree protect themselves. But for me, to say that we've looked good going forward, especially at home, nah, not really. I mean, yes, if you're going to count that absolute wonder goal that Mohamed Kudus scored against Aston Villa that was disallowed because he was a yard offside, that was wonderful football. But that was also genius individual play. He took down a ball that come out of the sky from Vicario on his chest and finished magnificently. We're not doing nearly enough of that. And I would say, I've said it a few times, but Kudus looks absolutely spent at the moment. He looks knackered. And he was the one player in the first kind of 7-8 games who could hold the ball up for Spurs and could bring other players into it. So we just look a bit functional today. And he hasn't really given Matisse Tell a chance, not that many chances anyway, since he scored that goal at Leeds, which kind of surprised me. And obviously he's not going to be available for tonight's Champions League game. So I don't know. I'm sure if he can, he'll play Kudus on the right today. I'm hopeful he'll maybe play Odebear on the left and then Kolo Muani up front. But let's see what happens. Frank was asked, does he feel he has to protect his players, especially the younger ones, from getting their heads buried in their phones and being on social media too much? He says, I think that's big. I think sometimes I speak more about how much they do it. Some of the players are very good at it and some of them probably could be a little bit better. I think it's a bit down to the individual. I also think some of it, I like to say I'm still young, but it's another generation. They deal with it in a different way to us. If I started dealing with it, I think I would deal with it less well than they do. And then he was asked a few questions about the Copenhagen fans, obviously, because he used to manage Brøndby. He said, I think they'll be pleased to see me again. Of course, there's a relationship because I was head coach at Brøndby. Obviously, they're not the biggest fan of mine, but that's fair. That's part of it. Okay, guys, before I go on to the rest of the news from that press conference, little word from our sponsor, and once again, with a voiceover you might recognize.
Get yourself to okjersey.com where you can buy the best football shirts around, including this one I'm wearing now, and of course, the absolutely magnificent black Spurs away shirt. And as if that wasn't enough, if you go onto their website and like the look of one of the shirts there, choose your size, pick the Champions League badge for the sleeve as well if you're that way inclined, then go to checkout and type the code BARN into the coupon section. That's BARN as in short for Barnaby. And when you do, you'll get a whopping 8% off your purchase. Now, I'm no mathematician, but 8% means if you've spent, say, and let's face it, I'm being optimistic here, 100 quid, then you get £8 off, not to be sniffed at. Get yourself to okjersey.com to pick one up, or if you're too lazy to type in the website, just scan the QR code that's on the left of me throughout this video. Enjoy.
Thanks, guys. Next to Thomas Frank during yesterday's pre-match press conference was Guillermo Vicario, as I mentioned earlier. He was asked himself on why he thinks Tottenham are struggling at home at the moment. He said, to be fair, I don't know what the difference is. Probably in football, everything is related to the game individually. Of course, we didn't perform at our best and we lost against a London team. It's probably seen in a different perspective. I think we can change things quickly starting from tomorrow. Also, our record in European competition playing at home is a good one. I don't remember how many, fingers crossed, games we haven't lost at home. The actual answer, Guillermo, is we haven't lost at home in Europe since 2020. He went on to say, we have a big opportunity to turn this into another way. Tomorrow is the best chance to try to do that. Yeah, I mean, that's just media trained answer, really, isn't it? He went on to talk about the defeat against Chelsea and the reaction. He said, we have spoken in the changing room. We need cooler heads during the games. If we had a bit more help during some situations from the stands, maybe we could do a bit better, but we can't do anything about that. It was a big, painful situation. They can express their pain, meaning the crowd. Again, as I mentioned with Thomas Frank earlier, that just feels a little bit like blame. And I can understand why a lot of Spurs fans on social media are angry about those comments. I can see it from the players' perspective as well. You have to be able to see it from both the players and the fans' perspective. But for me, if I was a Spurs player, I would be like, sure, I'll talk about that in the changing room, but I would probably dial down during a press conference anything that could come across as blaming the players. And he went on to talk about he was asked about that free kick, if you remember, at the end of the Chelsea game where we had a chance to get in the box and he gave it to Jed Spence and there was frustration in the crowd because Spence ended up passing it back to Vicario. And he went on to say this. He said, you know, you take some decisions on the pitch and sometimes it's not the best and probably would have been decided in a different way to put in next time to put the ball forward in that occasion rather than playing short. It was just the wrong decision. Football is about trying to make the right decisions. Sometimes you can't do it 100% of the time. He went on to say about the situation at the stadium, I think it's normal. I was a fan when I was a kid and I was going to the Udinese stadium and I saw many of these things happen. Probably in Italy, it's also a little bit worse when you go. So I have big shoulders when it comes to that. It's not a huge problem, you know. It's like when you go to the theatre and you see a show and you don't like it and you express your reaction, your feelings. I like the thought of Guillermo Vicario at the theatre. Good analogy from him. So it's just about that. The main thing for us is to concentrate on what we have to do on the pitch, trying to be as focused as we can on our game plan and what we have to do, because it's just on us to show how we can turn the situation around, how we can win a game or draw a game like the other night rather than lose it. The other night against Chelsea, we probably made more mistakes than normally we do, and that was the reason why we couldn't overturn the result. There's also an interesting bit after the game, whilst they were doing the thanking the fans around the pitch, where Vicario pushed Bergvall away from the south stand and seemed to gesture towards a fan saying, I see you. He was asked whether he was protecting Bergvall there. He said, yeah, I think in every environment there are very good people and some bad people. Probably Lucas was in contact with one bad person. That doesn't necessarily say that everyone is bad, but there are some bad people in every environment. I had to protect him because he was a little bit emotional at that time. I think it's part of my experience to do it. We can discuss it inside the dressing room and not do it outside. So that's it. So basically it sounds like in that south stand after the game, somebody was abusing Lucas Bergvall, who had been taken off after 3 minutes with concussion. Like, which kind of fan are you if you're doing that? That's completely mad. So I think Vicario did the right thing there, pushing Bergvall away. Should say, before that press conference, the BBC were reporting that insiders at Tottenham felt that Spence and Van de Ven ignoring Thomas Frank after that game Wasn't a slight on Thomas Frank, but more a show of frustration on as to what had built up in terms of booing during the game and over previous weeks. So that's what the BBC were reporting. Thomas Frank was also asked, slightly bizarrely, on whether it's fair that clubs will lose players to the African Cup of Nations. Of course, we'll be losing Pat Matasar at least for that. He said, I think it is what it is. It was the Club World Cup in the summer. It was the African Cup of Nations in January. Most of the time it's been in December or January. We deal with it and we will deal with it. That's my take on it. And then some final transfer news. And this is something I've been talking about for a while, something that wouldn't surprise me at all. Obviously, Robert Lewandowski joined Barcelona very late in his career when he was like 33 or 34. And I've been thinking, will Harry Kane go to Barcelona next? Obviously, he has I think it's a £56 million release clause that activates in 2026. I think maybe even as early as January. Is there a possibility he might not come back to the Premier League and actually choose to go to Barcelona, where he would, I think, have his best chance of winning the Ballon d'Or? And this is the rumor doing the rounds in Spanish football at the moment. He's weighing up the prospect of joining the Catalan Giants, with the representatives already holding discussions with them and several other clubs worldwide. If you were Harry Kane and you had a chance to come back to the Premier League, realistically, probably only with Spurs, if you look at how the other big clubs in the Premier League have got strikers, would you choose to come back to the Premier League and try and become the all-time highest scorer in the Premier League? Or would you choose to go to Barcelona and have a proper shot at winning the Ballon d'Or? Interesting one. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching and listening today. Really appreciate your support. Do give the video a like and subscribe to the channel on YouTube for daily Tottenham news. And as we get closer to the transfer window, also more Tottenham transfer tittle tattle. And as I said earlier, I'll be on BigUp tonight for the watch along. So join me there. It'll start at 7:55, 5 minutes before kickoff. Details of how to join BigUp in the description box below. And enjoy your Tuesdays, guys. Come on, you Spurs.
Get yourself to okjersey.com, where you can buy the best football shirts around, including this one I'm wearing now. And of course, the absolutely magnificent black Spurs away shirt. And as if that wasn't enough, you go onto their website and like the look of one of the shirts there, choose your size, pick the Champions League badge for the sleeve as well if you're that way inclined, then go to checkout and type the code BARN into the coupon section. That's BARN as in short for Barnaby. And when you do, you'll get a whopping 8% off your purchase. Now, I'm no mathematician, but 8% means if you've spent, say, and let's face it, I'm being optimistic here, 100 quid, then you get £8 off, not to be sniffed at. Get yourself to okjersey.com to pick one up, or if you're too lazy to type in the website, just scan the QR code that's on the left of me throughout this video.